Hey guys. Today we step into a quiet moment far from the usual thunder of spears and war cries. Right into the eerie calm of the oracle at Delphi, where you expect secrets whispered in riddles, but instead find all attention caught by a rather unexpected figure, a goose. Yes, a goose. You trudge through the sacred temple. The cool marble floor smooth underfoot. The faint scent of incense mingling with dust. And your eyes flicker nervously around the dim space. You probably won't survive a Spartan battle, but surviving a goose's peck at your toes, that might be tougher than you think. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments, so we can keep a little worldly company on this strange journey. Now, relax, maybe put on some soft music, and let's get started on today's journey together. You step closer to the famed Pythia's throne, expecting a hush and cryptic utterances. But instead, the tension is oddly focused on a goose, not a priestess. This isn't just any goose, it's white, plump, and utterly unbothered by the assembled generals who try to interpret the oracle's prophecies. You see, these Spartans have come far to seek guidance for their next military campaign, clutching their spears and hoping for the gods' favor. But the oracle herself is distracted, and the general's attention quickly turns to this feathered interloper, who has developed a peculiar habit of chasing toes and honking with alarming conviction. Here's a solid historical fact for you. Delphi was indeed the most prestigious oracle in ancient Greece, and armies often consulted its priestess before campaigns. But what if the real message came not from the divine mouthpiece but from a noisy goose? This is where history meets legend. Or maybe just confusion in the temple corridors. Now, as you watch, the generals grow increasingly nervous. They interpret the goose's sudden flapping and beak nudging as an omen, though to you, it looks more like an unruly pet interrupting a serious meeting. The bizarre part is, the Spartans believed deeply in signs from animals. A goose biting a toe might sound ridiculous now, but back then, it was all part of divine communication. Some scholars argue this shows how much ancient cultures relied on natural phenomena as a form of prophecy, while others suggest the whole story might be an exaggerated anecdote born from a misunderstanding or deliberate political theater. You start to notice how the atmosphere thickens with tension as the goose's antics continue, honking sharply, flapping wings, and causing the generals to jostle nervously for position. The way the light catches on the marble and the goose's feathers makes you almost forget the seriousness of the scene. This little bird holds the room's fate in its beak, deciding, quite literally, which generals get to lead and which stay home. And here's a quirky tidbit for you. Geese were considered sacred and often associated with protection in ancient Greece. The story of the goose at Delphi parallels a similar tale from Rome, where the sacred geese supposedly saved the city by alerting soldiers to an attack. So, these birds were not just feathered nuisances, but were genuinely feared and respected for their mystical powers. Imagine trying to sleep knowing a goose's honk could start a war. The debate still rages today among historians. Was the goose's behavior truly prophetic? Or was it a happy coincidence inflated by storytellers? Some believe the tale was a clever political ploy, using animal behavior to justify risky military decisions or to intimidate rivals with supposed divine backing. Others suggest the Spartans' famously disciplined nature makes them unlikely to be swayed by mere birds, preferring concrete strategy over superstition. You can almost feel the goose's feathers brushing past your fingers as it struts arrogantly through the temple, unaware of the weight it carries. The generals, sweating under their bronze helmets, whisper urgent debates about whether this feathery omen signals a blessing or a warning. So you settle in, imagining the oddly serene chaos, the echoing clatter of sandals on stone, the rustle of white robes, the hushed prayers to Apollo, all punctuated by the persistent honk of that goose. This unexpected messenger, neither hero nor villain, quietly commands the stage. Remember, this is just the beginning. The Goose's story will follow you as you leave the temple and watch the Spartans themselves wrestle with this divine intervention, or what may have just been a very noisy bird with impeccable timing. You find yourself trekking alongside the Spartan army, a harsh wind cutting through the dust and sweat as the soldiers march toward their campaign. The sharp clang of armor mixes with the distant calls of commanders rallying their troops. But your mind keeps drifting back to that cheeky Goose at Delphi, the unexpected oracle who, for better or worse, helped decide this military venture. It's a strange feeling, watching these famously stoic warriors quietly influenced by something as mundane as a honking bird. But then again, you realize, Spartan history is full of contradictions. Here's your historical anchor: the Spartans, known for their brutal training regime, the agog, were among the most disciplined and feared soldiers in ancient Greece. Their entire society revolved around preparing for war, where every Spartan male was expected to be a warrior from childhood to old age. But today, as you trudge through the rocky terrain with them, you notice a peculiar unease. They're waiting, watching for signs, hoping the Goose's message holds true. Now, here's where things get delightfully quirky. The story of the Goose influencing a campaign ties into a broader cultural obsession the Greeks had with birds and animal omens. Augury, reading the will of the gods through birds' behavior, was a serious business. But imagine the Goose's perspective, probably just minding its own business. Maybe pecking at some stray crumbs, when suddenly it's thrust into the spotlight as the divine messenger. Some fringe tales even suggest these geese were trained by temple priests to perform certain actions to nudge decisions. Could it be the Spartan campaign was less about divine will and more about clever animal training? This is where scholarly debate kicks in, questioning just how natural these signs really were. As you march with the soldiers, you hear snippets of conversation. One officer grumbles about the Goose's interpretation, calling it a lucky coincidence, while another swears it was a clear divine sign, citing past battles won after such animal omens. You can't help but smirk. It's a reminder that even the toughest soldiers need a little superstition to steady their nerves. And you remember that one time you tried to convince yourself that finding a four-leaf clover would get you through a bad day. You're not so different from these Spartans. After all, the landscape grows harsher, cliffs rising sharply on one side, the sea shimmering in the distance. The air smells of salt and pine, and you feel the weight of history pressing down. Somewhere ahead lies the battlefield where this Goose's prophecy will be put to the test. But before that, you catch a glimpse of a lesser-known historical fact: Spartan military campaigns were often tightly controlled and carefully planned. But decisions sometimes hinged on quick moments of interpreted signs or dreams. It's this delicate balance between rigid discipline and superstition that makes Spartan lore so fascinating and confounding. There's an open debate in academia about how much these animal omens genuinely influenced military tactics. Some scholars argue that such stories were later inventions to romanticize or mystify Spartan courage. Others suggest that these signs played a critical role in decision-making. Especially when commanders faced uncertainty or low morale. You lean toward the latter, imagining the Goose as a talisman, a small anchor in a chaotic world. And here's a quirky aside: some sources claim the Goose at Delphi had a particular fondness for noblemen's sandals, often chasing after them to nip at their toes. This odd behavior was read as a sign of impending conflict or success, depending on which way the bird flapped or honked. It's the ancient version of "watch your step" or "break a leg," but with feathers and honks instead of words. You start to appreciate how this odd episode reflects a larger truth about human nature, our endless search for meaning in random events. The Spartans might have been legendary warriors, but they, too, sought comfort in signs and symbols, especially when lives hung in the balance. As the sun dips low, casting long shadows over the rugged landscape, the army halts for the night. Campfires flicker, casting warm glows against worn faces and weathered armor. The soldiers share stories, some about glory, others about strange omens, like the goose that decided a campaign. You realize that these stories, no matter how strange or lacking in drama by usual mythic standards, stitch together the fabric of belief and identity that held Spartan society together. Remember that odd little detail about the goose's toe biting. It's more than a cute anecdote. It symbolizes how even in the gravest moments, humor and unpredictability sneak in. The tension in this camp tonight is palpable, but so is a quiet sense of anticipation, as if everyone's holding their breath, waiting for the gods and geese to weigh in. And as you settle near the fire, you wonder, was this goose truly a divine oracle or just a lucky bird at the right place and time? Maybe it's not so important. After all, belief can shape reality in ways that facts alone never can. You wake to the soft, crackling chorus of the campfire fading and the first blush of dawn creeping over the hills. The Spartans move with their usual precision, but you notice a subtle change in their demeanor, a mix of tension and quiet excitement. Today is the day the goose's prophecy will either shine as a beacon of hope or fade into an embarrassing footnote in Spartan history. You follow the ranks, your boots crunching over scattered olive leaves and broken twigs, and wonder how often such tiny details, the honk of a bird, the snap of a twig, have altered the course of empires. Here's a historical fact to ground you: the Spartans, despite their reputation for rigidity, often adapted their tactics based on various omens and signs. It wasn't just blind faith but a practical psychological tool. Commanders used these signs to boost morale or justify risky maneuvers. So when the goose at Delphi honked thrice in the morning, some took it as a green light to press on, while others remained skeptical, clutching their spears a little tighter. You overhear a whispered debate about whether the goose was truly an oracle or simply a distraction. Fringe historians propose that temple priests sometimes manipulated animal behavior to sway political or military decisions, blurring the line between genuine prophecy and theatrical showmanship. Imagine a covert, goose whisperer, coaxing the bird into auspicious honks at just the right moments. It almost sounds like the ancient world's version of political spin, minus the Twitter drama. But probably with just as much behind-the-scenes scheming. The march continues, and you find yourself thinking about how this story flips the usual heroic epic on its head. Instead of mighty gods or legendary heroes deciding battles, it's a humble bird, a goose, that holds sway. There's something beautifully absurd about that. Like history's version of a sitcom plot twist. It makes you wonder about the countless, lackluster legends, lost to time, moments where fate hinged on the quirks of animals or the superstitions of the day rather than grand battles or epic speeches. One fascinating scholarly debate revolves around the extent to which these animal omens were recorded accurately versus being exaggerated or invented later to add mystique to Spartan campaigns. Some argue that ancient chroniclers embellished stories to enhance their own prestige or align with prevailing cultural narratives. Others suggest the Spartans themselves encouraged such tales to intimidate enemies and unify their own ranks under a shared mythology. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some ancient sources mention that Spartan soldiers carried small tokens shaped like geese or birds, believed to bring good luck in battle. Think of it as a kind of ancient, lucky charm, or battlefield mascot. Just replace rubber ducks with honking birds. These little charms probably didn't turn the tide of war, but they added a dash of comfort to the grim reality of fighting. As you trudge alongside the hoplites, you notice the landscape is changing, rolling hills giving way to a narrow pass where the battle is expected. The air feels charged with anticipation. The goose's prophecy has brought them here, and now the weight of expectation presses down. Will the omen hold true? Or will this be another footnote in the dusty annals of history? Overshadowed by grander tales of heroism and bloodshed, the soldiers line up, shields interlocking, spears poised. The silence before the storm is broken only by the distant cry of a bird, maybe another goose, maybe a hawk, cutting through the morning air. You think back to that curious historical fact. While the Spartans revered discipline and strategy, they also deeply valued ritual and tradition. often blending superstition with military pragmatism. This blending creates a unique tension between cold steel and whispered prayers that defines much of their legacy. You glance at the commander, who casts a quick glance to the sky, fingers tightening around his spear. Whether he truly believes in the Goose's prophecy or simply respects the morale boost it provides, you can't say, but you do notice his eyes flicker with something almost like hope, or maybe it's just the morning sun catching the glint of his helmet. And then, with a steady breath, the Spartans move forward, the clash of their armor and the thud of their feet echoing through the pass. The Goose's honks fade behind you, replaced by the rising noise of battle cries and the sharp ring of weapons meeting shields. Whatever happens next, you know this story, an unlikely legend of a goose deciding a military campaign, will linger in your mind as a reminder that history often turns on the smallest, strangest moments. The air thickens with the metallic scent of sweat and the sharp tang of dust kicked up by marching feet as you press deeper into the Spartan ranks. You move with the disciplined formation, the rhythmic stomp of sandals blending with the distant murmur of enemy voices. But amid the palpable tension, your mind drifts back to that goose, a creature so incongruous in the brutal theater of war, yet somehow holding a strange kind of power over these hardened warriors. Here's a solid historical fact: Sparta was famous for its unwavering military discipline and rigid social structure, with boys training from childhood to become soldiers through the agog system. Yet, even this hyper-militarized society was not immune to the whims of superstition and symbolism. The goose's honk wasn't just a random noise, it was interpreted as an auspicious sign from Apollo's oracle at Delphi, a god deeply woven into the fabric of Greek religion and daily life. The Spartans took such omens seriously, believing they were messages from the divine guiding their fate. Now, imagine a fringe theory for a moment. Some scholars speculate that the goose's decision was less about fate and more about politics, a clever ploy by certain Spartan elites to justify a risky campaign or shift blame for potential failure. Was the goose a scapegoat? An easy way to say, the gods made us do it, when things went sideways. It's a tantalizing idea that challenges the heroic veneer of Spartan mythology, suggesting that ancient warfare might have been just as messy and politically charged as any modern conflict. You notice how the soldiers around you clutch their shields a little tighter, eyes flicking to the sky, as if willing the omen to stay favorable. It's a moment where faith and fear blur. The goose's honk, once a simple bird call, has transformed into a symbol of hope and dread all at once. You think about how this mirrors other cultural moments where animals are seen as harbingers, like ravens in Norse mythology or owls in Roman tales, small creatures wielding outsized influence over human decisions. And here's a quirky tidbit to lighten the mood. According to some ancient sources, Spartan warriors were known to carry little tokens or amulets shaped like geese, believed to protect them in battle. Yes, the same goose that decided a campaign became a kind of furry, or feathery, mascot. It's a bit like how modern athletes have lucky socks or weird rituals, except with more blood and less awkward social media posts. As you trudge alongside these soldiers, the landscape shifts again. The narrow pass gives way to a rocky ridge overlooking the enemy's position. The tension thickens. Every breath you take feels heavier. The commander raises his hand, signaling the attack. Before you move, your mind circles back to a persistent scholarly debate. To what extent did the Spartans truly rely on these omens in strategic decisions? Were they genuinely guiding principles or elaborate morale tools? The clash begins with a thunderous roar, shields slamming, spears thrusting, and voices yelling in a cacophony of chaos. Amid the chaos, you catch a glimpse of the commander's face, grim and focused, but with a flicker of something else, perhaps gratitude toward the goose that led them here. Or maybe just the madness of battle playing tricks on tired minds. This moment captures the strange duality of Spartan warfare, brutal, efficient, yet steeped in ritual and belief. The goose's prophecy, whether true or fabricated, has become an integral thread in the tapestry of this campaign. It reminds you that history isn't just about grand strategies and famous leaders. It's about the odd, overlooked details that shape events in unexpected ways. You feel the rhythm of the battle pounding in your chest, the ground trembling beneath you, and realize that sometimes, the smallest creatures can cast the longest shadows. And as the fighting rages on, the legend of the goose lingers. A curious footnote in the epic saga of Sparta. The clash of bronze and the shouts of warriors fade slowly as the dust begins to settle, leaving behind a landscape scarred by conflict and echoes of the goose's fateful honk. You stand among the remnants of the Spartan campaign, a mix of exhaustion and disbelief settling in your bones. This goose, yes, a mere goose, has woven itself into the very fabric of this military venture. An unlikely protagonist in a tale of honor, blood, and superstition. Here's a solid historical fact to anchor you. The Battle of the Acropolis in 480 BCE, part of the larger Greco-Persian Wars, was one of Sparta's many displays of military might and sacrifice. The Spartans famously held their ground with unyielding discipline, despite being vastly outnumbered, while the goose's role might not be recorded explicitly in mainstream histories. Animals as omens or divine signs were a widespread and accepted part of Greek martial culture. Now for a quirky tidbit to wrap your mind around. Ancient Greeks sometimes believed that geese were sacred to the goddess Hera, protector of marriage and the city. So, this goose wasn't just any bird. It was practically a VIP in the divine guest list. Maybe it's less surprising the Spartans took its honk seriously, as if a city goddess herself was whispering orders through feathers and beaks. But here's the scholarly debate that keeps historians up at night. Was this reliance on animal omens genuine religious conviction, or a convenient tool for leaders to sway public opinion and morale? Some argue that these stories were later additions, crafted to explain otherwise inexplicable military outcomes or to give divine legitimacy to decisions made behind closed doors. This question invites us to reconsider how history is often a blend of fact, myth, and political theater. As you absorb this, the sun dips low, casting long shadows over the battlefield. The wind whispers through broken spears and discarded helmets, almost as if nature itself is remembering the goose's call. You realize that this story, like many from ancient times, thrives in the space between reality and legend, where a simple animal's honk can ripple through centuries as a symbol of fate, folly, or faith. The Spartan soldiers, hardened by their grueling training, had their lives and plans swayed not just by sword and shield, but by the unpredictable whims of nature and belief. It's a humbling reminder that history is rarely straightforward, and sometimes the smallest actors, the goose in this case, can shape events in ways no general could have planned. Before you step away from this strange chapter, picture the goose itself, probably unimpressed by its newfound fame, wandering off into the wilds, oblivious to the weight its honk carried. And maybe that's the perfect ending, not a heroic charge or a grand victory, but a quiet bird whose call echoed through time. Now, as you sit back and let this story settle, you might feel a little less certain about the grand narratives we tell about history. Because sometimes, the truth is stranger, sillier, and far more human than the legends we prefer. Now, relax your shoulders, breathe slowly, and let your mind drift gently from the dust of ancient battlefields to the soft rustle of feathers. The echoes of the past fade softly as your thoughts settle, leaving you calm and curious, wrapped in the quiet mystery of a goose that once swayed the course of Spartan war. Sweet dreams.